Welcome to the Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group. The following meeting, entitled Generative AI in Education, took place on August the 8th, 2023 at the Atlas Building on the CU Boulder campus. The following presentation was made by Dr. Peter Foltz. For future meetings, check out our meetup group and also our website at RMAIIG.org.
Dr. Peter Foltz is Executive Director of the National Science Foundation's AI Institute for Student AI Teaming, which is called iSAT at CU Boulder. It's an interdisciplinary research community dedicated to transforming classrooms into more effective, engaging, and equitable learning environments. Incidentally, CU Boulder hosts one of 5 NSF $20 million AI institutes. So this is one of only 5 in the country. And that's to accelerate research, expand America's workforce, and transform society in the decades to come. Dr. Foltz is research professor at CU's Institute of Cognitive Science. His work covers machine learning and natural language processing for educational and clinical assessments, large-scale data analytics, cognitive skills in reading and writing, team collaboration, and 21st century skills learning. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Peter Foltz.
Thank you, Dan. Let me check, make sure audio is working here and virtually as well. Good. Yeah, I'll start off with just a little story as well, sort of how I got it. I mean, the topic of this is large language models in education. So how I got into really sort of focusing on AI in education is I've been working in AI since a graduate student many years ago here, but when I was first a professor, I was teaching very large introductory classes, in this case, large introductory psychology class. One of the things I know, and this partially comes from psychology, is the best way to make students to learn is to make them write. So as a newly minted assistant professor, I decided, why don't I just have the students write essays every week? They'll really learn a lot from it. What I found was I was spending my whole weekends grading essays. And what would happen is I would hand the essays back to the students. They would look at the number on it, stick it back in their folder, and walk away. And so I realized that there was no learning in that. So because I had actually been working on something that was now a precursor of large language models, but essentially a small large language model at that time, I developed some technology along with some colleagues to automatically score students' essays, not just for the quality of their writing, but also for the content of the writing, and put it into the class. And we started using it, and we could have students write essays, get instant feedback, and they could revise and resubmit their essays as many times they want. And then I could still look at the last one. What we found was students not only enjoyed it, but they also learned. And so that really started off sort of my work in applying AI to education. Let me get my talk going. There we go. So I'm going to talk about large language models, both some challenges and opportunities. And I'm actually combining 2 different talks here. One of them is part of a talk I gave to the Board of Regents, who late in the fall contacted me as well as some others and said, hey, what is the university supposed to do about large language models? And so some of us gave some advice about it. I don't know if we gave them solutions. And then the second thing is I'm going to talk about some of the work happening at the Institute for Student AI Teaming. And sort of between those two, what I really want to do is really point out some of the directions I think that AI is going in education, as well as some of the challenges and opportunities that are happening there. So first thing is, I mean, we all know that our world is really changing rapidly to AI. I mean, we sort of now just routinely say, hey, is it going to rain the next hour? Or suddenly something tells you need to leave at 5:24 to get to your talk. And there's more insidious things where somebody, a computer just asks, is that you in a photo? And you don't quite know what it's going to use it for, but it's probably using it for something. And now it's sort of like, you can say, well, write me an essay on the use of water as a symbol in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And it will come out with something pretty good. So we need to sort of adjust to the fact that the world is rapidly changing. And what's happening is suddenly everybody is starting to notice. And if you've sort of noticed the news there, it's coming out everywhere. And some of them are sort of doomsayers. The college essay is dead. It's gotten better at doing writing assignments. And there's also a lot of talk about sort of what are the business opportunities that are happening there. And how do you actually turn this into something that's going to be useful and profitable? And then we say, well, are these new large language models actually having an effect on how education is being performed? Dan already sort of gave examples. People are using ChatGPT there. So I'll put out just sort of two things. This is the company Chegg. Chegg develops study material. Some of their study material looks extremely close to educational material that has been done by other publishing companies, but they sell a subscription to it. And they suddenly reported that they're going to not make the same kind of profit they've been making in years, and their shares tumbled 50%, pretty much due to ChatGPT. Second example is a student at Texas, or a professor at Texas A&M Commerce, who decided, well, I'm just going to submit all my essays to all the student essays to ChatGPT and say, did you write this one? And ChatGPT said, oh yeah, I wrote that. Oh yeah, I wrote that. And then the professor said, okay, you all fail. Now, I like that because I think this is one of the key points here is AI literacy is going to be really important here about how to use these tools. These tools are going to keep on coming out, and how do we think about using them? And I'll also point out that AI in education isn't new, from the 1980s and even a little bit earlier than that, there have been effective tutoring systems out there. There's been AI-based assessment of writing and speaking that's been around that's actually used. If any of you have kids and they take the standardized assessment run by Colorado, a program that I wrote is probably grading their student writing. Good news is that there's also a human grading it, but if the two agree, then that's the grade they get. If they disagree, it goes to another human. But that technology has been integrated in a lot of different places there. And there's a lot of uses because you can use it for practice or you can use it for large scale assessment. But a lot of that sort of earlier AI was trained on very specific examples for the students. Often there's a lot more hand building of the models. It also tends to be unimodal, as in it captures writing, captures speaking, it captures some particular action. Whereas if you think what a teacher does in a class when they're working with a student, they're looking at gestures, they're looking at what the student's looking at, they're looking at how the student is speaking, they're looking at what the student is writing, and they're combining that into a much larger picture to be able to adjust to be able to teach the student. And a lot of these models didn't have a lot of generalization, and they really focused more on being able to assess rather than to be able to generate. So what's different about generative AI? Now, the nice thing is Dan asked some questions at the beginning and almost everybody raised their hands. So almost all the stuff here is probably something that almost everybody knows about somewhat. But, I would say that some of the key differentiators are that generative AI generates new content rather than just analyzing or act upon existing data. And that is a real differentiator because it allows the creation of all sorts of different material. And I'm not going to go into any of the details about generative AI. What I'm going to really want to do is focus on some of the examples and then some of the implications. So since I put it up in the beginning, yes, you can ask ChatGPT to write essay on T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. It's actually pretty good. And the nice thing is it's not just giving something very general, but it's actually talking about sort of water as a symbol, and it is pulling up that information and picking up some good examples there. You can also, if you're a student, say, well, write a 300-word essay on comparing, contrasting, but make some grammar errors and make some spelling errors. Now, this is makes it much harder for a poor professor who looks at this and goes, well, that can't be generated by a computer, because nobody would have made that kind of a stupid mistake if they had a computer. So it's actually very good there. You know, it says things like, you know, has its roots, and roots is misspelled. There's other little grammar errors in there. But there are some really nice things. You can take any text and simplify it for different levels. So you can say, you know, explain Rogerian psychology to a 12-year-old. You can also say something like, well, explain a certain aspect of biology to a physicist, and it will sort of be able to pick examples there that will turn it around there. So it's able to pull out some very useful things there. But this has some very nice implications for education in terms of text simplification, in terms of being able to generate novel content that can be personalized to students. And it can be used for developing programs. I use it a fair bit now. It's definitely sped up my programming, partially because I'm extremely rusty. And so, but on the other hand, it does tend to make a number of errors. And so you have to go back and check some of these things there. But it actually can do a fairly nice job for it. And then if you're an instructor, you can do things like say, well, I need to build a scoring rubric because I just assigned an essay, and you can give the essay and say, what would be a good scoring rubric? And you know, it pulls out different things about, here are some of the things that you would need to talk about in this topic to be able to do it. You really want to focus on use of evidence and organization. Then there's going to be things about mechanics and style. But a lot of the things is that it also points out some of the things that are important in terms of talking about the CFA Frank and what a student should talk about. So this actually sort of provides it sort of as, think about it as a way, as a tool for instructors. You know, there's a lot of challenges for using large language models in education. And, you know, one of the key things is that LLMs are based on the data they're trained upon. And so they can have false information, they can have hallucinations, they can be wrong, they can do biased information. These are some of the things that I've tried. So if you say, what is the world record for crossing the English Channel entirely on foot? It says, you know, the entirely on foot is 12 hours and 10 minutes. And it missed the point that I said on foot, but it does sort of say, well, you know, the route is usually completed either by swimming or using a combination of swimming and wading. So it, you know, it sort of tried to come back to saying, well, yeah, it was on foot, but it's not. You give it certain kinds of math problems, it's not going to do that. And, you know, there's been a lot of examples out there of biases. If you ask Midjourney to generate pictures of what it thinks professors look like, it reflects certain biases that are inherent in the population there. So those are things that you want to think about, because if you said, well, grade these professors, grade these pictures of professors that people drew, and you draw something that doesn't look like one of their average pictures, it may do something different. So some of the other challenges there is, okay, well, we have all these models, and we saw, you know, there's ChatGPT, there's Claude, there's Bard, there's Llama out there. How do we know that if we're going to apply one in education, what's the right model? Is there a way to certify that the model that's been built is the right quality there? There's always the question about plagiarism detectors. They don't work. There's been a lot of them out there, but I get asked that question a lot. Detection of LLM plagiarism, just too many false alarms, so they cause more problem. Another thing is we may be creating student dependence on this technology. So the question is, How do you train students to be able to think on their own in situations where they'll think on their own? Or how do you create situations where they'll be able to build enough where they know how to use the tools when they can use the tools, but when they also can't there? There's lots of issues about privacy. If you use Zoom, you can see that this week Zoom changed their privacy laws that says all data on Zoom may be subjected to use for their AI models. So if you're saying anything on there, it may be incorporated in a new model there. And then there's big equity questions because, so we have access to these, but, what's the difference between a student who is paying for the premium version of ChatGPT versus the regular one? What about students who don't have any access? So those are all some of the challenges that come up there. But there's a lot of opportunities there. I mean, it can help speed up what teachers do in terms of syllabus development, building and developing course material, also building assessments. It's actually really good at building short answer quizzes and multiple choice quizzes there. It can do really nice scoring of open-ended responses. But I think probably the biggest is it also is a forcing function to make teachers think about this. What is the goals of your assessment and learning in your class? If everything can be answered by ChatGPT, are you having the student do the kinds of things you really want to do in that class? And so, some of that is to think about, well, how do you design your class for more human interactions? Or, how do you get more critical thinking in there? How do you get more collaboration? How do you get more creativity in there? The kinds of skills that students are going to need to use when they get out. And for student learning, there's a number of different opportunities. One is as a social collaborative partner, and that's what I will talk about next there. But I think there's a lot of nice things it can do. It can be used for practice, and students can iterate with an intelligent system, learn a lot, but still then have that scored by an instructor. It is really good at adapting, both adapting materials, but also adapting to various different students' needs, and being able to personalize the feedback. So I'm going to sort of now switch a little bit and go into talking about very quickly about AI as a social collaborative partner. And this is the work that's happening at our institute. This is the Institute for Student AI Teaming. We're headquartered here at CU, but we're 9 universities across the United States that are doing this work. And our goal really is to build AI tools that are social collaborative partners. And the idea is to support both teachers and students as that. And we want this to have students who learn more effectively, also learn to engage, and also work more equitably. And the focus on this is really not on how do we teach content skills, but how do we use AI to teach collaboration skills. So our idea of this really is that if we can put students in socio-collaborative experiences, how can we then actually promote more learning of the content areas? So we're not focused on saying, how do we teach science? How do we teach math? We're focused on how do we teach collaboration and then put students in these collaborative situations that improve their science and their math. So what I'm going to sort of talk a bit is something that one of the things we built, which is called the Community Builder. And the idea of the Community Builder is a system that we have running in a series of middle school classrooms and St. Vrain public schools, as well as Denver public schools, which monitors students when they're doing group work. It gives them feedback on a set of community agreements, which I'll talk about, and how well they're following class norms, and supports them in terms of sort of building the relationships. And a lot of this came by doing workshops with students, with teachers to sort of understand what they need for it. So before I sort of show what it looks like, I'll just talk a little bit about what it looks like under the hood. And this is one of the things is we're analyzing a lot of different things. We're actually placing microphones in the middle of groups of students who are all working together in a project. We're capturing all the audio as they're talking. We're also capturing video. And then we're running it through a series of different analyses. So these are some of the analyses, like what's the quality of the acoustics there, because it can be really noisy in a classroom. We're looking at sort of how much each person is talking. We're able to do automated speech recognition on it. We can tell whether they're on task or off task. We can see whether they're actually specific to a topic they're supposed to be talking about. We're doing models that automatically assess the collaboration. So we're looking at things like whether the team is functioning well, whether they're building knowledge, whether they're negotiating or coordinating at that. And then we're also capturing where they're looking. So where they're focused, whether we're seeing joint attention on the same things or looking at different directions, what they're looking at. So we're able to combine this all into sort of a model there. And that's not the student interface, because students don't want that kind of feedback. Instead, because we're working with middle schoolers, what students are trying to do is to try to follow certain classroom norms. Like, are they being committed to their community? Are they being respectful? Are they moving the thinking forward? Are they being equitable while they're working in a team? And what we're doing is we have a small visual display of a tree, and that tree is growing. The more they talk, the more leaves that appear on it. The more the more they're moving their thinking forward, red flowers start to bloom on it. The more they're being committed to the community, orange flowers grow on it. And part of this is working with sort of the design that you can't just give graphs to students, but what you want to do is sort of be able to motivate them with this. And they're sort of looking at the tree, or they'll sort of talk about it and go, oh, look, we're a little bit low on respect here, and it gets them to reflect, sort of come back to this. So this is sort of how we want to think about AI. AI isn't always just this agent or robot that's going, hey, you're not being respectful. But what we're trying to do is drive more positive behavior there. So I really won't go through a lot of this, but sort of if you want to sort of know under the hood, this is just one of our models that we're doing here. We've got audio coming in. It's run through Whisper ASR. We're using a Roberta encoder where we've got models for these different types of agreements that students are making there. So we're classifying everything they're saying based on those agreements, and then we aggregate that, filter it, and then put it out in terms of sets of graphics for the students. And that actually fits into a much larger architecture where we're actually doing multimodal processing of capturing other things like their eye gaze and other things. But this sort of gives an idea of sort of how sort of what's happening under the hood for the work we're doing. So just some conclusions on all this. One, sort of from the larger picture of large language models, we want to think about large language models as tools. They're not replacements for teachers or students, or for getting students to do critical thinking there. We do want to sort of be careful, because they're going to continue to get better and better. And even over the last year, so you can see some of the things they do is that they're getting more capabilities. But there's still a lot of issues of unreliability and bias. And my view is that 89 to 90% of the work that people are going to do, they can apply a large language model to education, and then they're going to spend 80 to 90% of their work building guardrails to protect the students for that. And matter of fact, I've worked with several companies where that's what you're doing. You can't have it go off the rails, particularly with middle schoolers there. So there's always going to be a lot of validation and checking, making sure it's appropriate there. But a lot of this is really thinking about how do you design AI where there's situations where humans in the loop. In our situation with the Institute, almost always teachers are seeing these outputs as well, and they're helping students interpret them, so they're seeing it there. We want to be aware that students are always going to have access to and will exploit these capabilities there. So faculty are going to continually need to adapt there. And so I think probably the key thing here is to make sure that students and teachers become better consumers of all this. So, but sort of from the perspective of sort of where we think all this is going to going, and sort of where things are with the Institute, is that most AI, including a lot of the large language models work so far, is really focused on a uniparty, that is one person, unimodal, that is one mode of communication there, and it's really focused around sort of automating a workflow for some personalized learning. And some of the new ones that are out there are still doing that. What we're doing at this institute is really thinking much more about multimodal, multi-party learning, that students are learning with lots of different kinds of input, lots of different ways of interacting with each other. So we want to look at the gestures, we want to look at where they're looking, what they're saying, how they're saying it there. But we also want to look at students learning together, not just a chatbot working with individual students there. And so really this is the challenge that we're doing, is really sort of focusing, how do we build some of these new kinds of agents at the same time as how do we